Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we've got a massive geopolitical and economic shift unfolding literally right before our eyes today. Japanese Prime Minister Takeuchi is arriving in New Delhi for a highly anticipated visit. And the implications of this meeting? They're set to completely rewrite the financial rulebook for Asia. We're looking at a profound transformation in how two of the region's biggest powers do business, and it's going to impact global trade in a very real way. Let's dive right in.
So to really grasp the gravity of this summit, we got to start with a huge question. For decades, global trade has operated on one foundational assumption. The US dollar is the undisputed king. But what happens when two economic giants look at that system and decide to just walk away? That is exactly the reality India and Japan are moving towards, and it fundamentally challenges the traditional global financial order.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, a historic financial shift. Then we'll look at bypassing the US dollar, countering the China factor, building a new manufacturing hub, and finally, the new Asian architecture.
All right, part one, a historic financial shift.
The immediate catalyst for this transformation is Prime Minister Takeuchi's three-day visit to India, marking the 16th annual summit with PM Modi. Listen, these talks aren't just theoretical. They are finalizing a direct Rupee-Yen settlement deal that's slated for full implementation by the 2026 financial year. We are talking about actionable, near-term structural change here.
Which brings us to part two, bypassing the US dollar.
To understand why this is such a game changer, you kind of have to look at the old, clunky way of doing things. It's basically a game of financial telephone. Indian rupees had to be converted to US dollars through a correspondent bank, and then those dollars were converted into Japanese yen. It involved third parties, extra steps, and unnecessary friction. But under this new system, Japanese companies can simply open accounts directly in Indian banks, and major banks in both nations can settle payments directly in rupees and yen.
By cutting out the middleman, we see a cascade of direct benefits. First off, it significantly lowers transaction costs. Second, it allows for much faster capital settlement because you aren't waiting on foreign intermediaries. Third, it completely eliminates the need for US dollar correspondent banks. And fourth, it neutralizes currency conversion risks. Basically, it creates a completely insulated, frictionless trade loop between the two nations, which is absolutely vital for smooth foreign direct investment.
And you know, the math proves exactly why this makes economic sense. Over the past year, the Indian rupee dropped roughly 10% against the US dollar. However, when you look at the rupee against the Japanese yen, it actually strengthened by 2.2%. So, despite the rupee and yen being relatively stable with one another, relying on a third-party currency like the dollar forces these nations to absorb totally unnecessary fluctuations.
Beyond just daily exchange rates, there's a broader structural anxiety at play here. Both nations have realized that relying on a third-party currency exposes their bilateral trade to unpredictable U.S. fiscal policies. Whenever the U.S. shifts its economic strategies, that dollar volatility ripples out. This direct rupee-yen deal is a highly calculated move to actively neutralize that third-party risk, keeping their mutual economic growth entirely within their own control.
Moving on to part three, countering the China factor.
Because look, this financial pivot isn't happening in a vacuum. It's deeply tied to regional security. As Japan pursues a more robust defense posture, China has responded with severe economic pressure. We're talking stringent export controls targeting dozens of Japanese firms, escalating military tensions in the region, and exposing deep vulnerabilities in global supply chains. Honestly, there's been a near-total breakdown of bilateral trust. Consequently, Japan is actively looking to decouple its critical industries from China, meaning they urgently need a reliable alternative partner they can actually trust.
PM Takeuchi's worldview makes this shift crystal clear. She's picking up the mantle of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was the original architect of these modern India-Japan ties. The ultimate goal is to build an autonomous bilateral network that continues the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, one that allows both nations to thrive securely, totally insulated from external pressures or threats.
And this security commitment is already moving from theory into tangible tech. Back in November 2024, the two nations co-developed Unicorn, the Unified Complex Radio Antenna Mast. This is a massive milestone because it marks their very first joint defense equipment project. As Japan scales up its defense capabilities, India is positioning itself as a vital manufacturing base, not just for domestic needs, but potentially for Japan and the rest of the world.
All right, part four, a new manufacturing hub.
Let's dive into this massive number, $61 billion.
According to reports, Japan is planning to double its investments in India, pouring an estimated $61 billion into the country over this current decade. With the new direct currency settlement smoothing the way, this capital can flow much more efficiently, completely bypassing those traditional dollar clearing systems.
So where is all this money going? Well, we're seeing major commitments targeted at semiconductors, with significant investments specifically flagged for Assam. Beyond that, the capital is going to flood straight into clean energy, electric vehicles, and medical goods manufacturing. Importantly, all of this Japanese investment perfectly complements India's own domestic initiatives like the PLI or Production Linked Incentive Scheme and the whole Make in India campaign.
For Japanese investors, the contrast is pretty stark. China is increasingly viewed as high risk, characterized by export controls and weaponized supply chains. Meanwhile, India offers exactly what Japan needs right now: a trusted partner, a scalable and low-cost manufacturing base, and a real commitment to building resilient supply chains. Japan is actively shifting its next-generation manufacturing out of a hostile environment and into one rooted in mutual economic security.
Finally, Part 5, the new Asian architecture.
If we zoom out for a second, what we are really watching are two sovereign powers deliberately writing their own economic rulebook. Step 1. Establish autonomous bilateral trade. Step 2. Build the direct financial infrastructure to actually support it, like the Rupee-Yen settlement. And Step 3. Secure their supply chains entirely on their own terms. They're proving they can achieve economic resilience without needing oversight or intermediary systems based in Washington.
Ultimately, India and Japan share the exact same regional concerns, and they're building a framework that survives regardless of external variables. While both maintain ties with the U.S., they recognize the limitations of relying on an external power whose policies might shift with different administrations. This new architecture ensures their core cooperation remains ironclad, completely independent of the U.S.'s posture in the Indo-Pacific.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to consider. We are watching two massive economies build a self-sustaining, dollar-free ecosystem. As India and Japan forge their own autonomous financial architecture, is this single summit the first major domino to fall? Are we witnessing the beginning of the end for unquestioned U.S. dollar dominance in global trade? The structures being built today in New Delhi suggest the world economy might look very different by the end of this decade.